My husband kissed me goodbye and said, "Business trip, honey. I'll be back in a week." But when I opened his briefcase, I found 2 tickets to Hawaii. I quietly packed my bags, called his boss, and boarded that second plane. When he saw me at the gate with his mistress, he turned white. I smiled and said, "Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax, let's begin." The zipper on his briefcase caught, as it often did, and I gave it a firm tug. The sound was sharp in the quiet kitchen. David had left in his usual morning rush, calling over his shoulder about a critical file, his kiss a dry brush against my cheek. I was used to retrieving things for him. My fingers smoothed the leather to guide the zipper past the stubborn spot, and that's when I felt it. Not the expected rigid corner of a folder, but something else. An envelope, sealed, tucked into the inner pocket meant for his tablet. I pulled it out. It was a standard business-sized envelope, but the paper was heavier, premium. My name was not on it. There was no name at all. A simple, unmarked white envelope in my husband's briefcase, which he had told me contained only paperwork for a 3-day business trip to Chicago. He had said, "I'm going on a business trip, honey. Back Thursday." I had nodded, handed him his travel mug, and thought nothing of it. The envelope was not sealed tightly. The flap was tucked in, not glued. I slid out the contents. 2 boarding passes printed on thick cardstock, first class, and beneath them the itinerary confirmation. I read the destination first. Honolulu. The flight was tomorrow afternoon. I checked the date on the paper again, then looked at the clock on the oven as if the appliance could correct this error. He was supposed to be in Chicago. The departure city was correct. The airline was one he used often. The passenger names were listed, David Carter, and guest. I held the papers by their edges. The boarding passes were of vibrant blue and white. They looked festive. The itinerary mentioned a resort in Waikiki. A 7-day stay. Not 3 days, not Chicago. 7 days in Hawaii. I placed the tickets on the kitchen island. I stood very still. The late afternoon sun came through the window over the sink and fell across the polished granite, illuminating the documents. They seemed to glow against the dark stone. I heard the echo of his voice, so casual, so ordinary. "Business trip, honey." I looked at my hands. They were steady. Then the reaction came. It started as a hollow sensation in my chest, a sudden void where certainty had been. My breath hitched. The kitchen, my kitchen, the place where I made coffee and packed lunches and planned our weeks, seemed to tilt slightly. The familiar view of the backyard through the window blurred. I pressed my lips together hard. I would not make a sound. But the tears came anyway, hot and insistent, tracking down my face silently. I did not wipe them away. I let them fall onto the front of my shirt, darkening the cotton. I cried for perhaps 3 minutes. It was a quiet, efficient purge. I thought of the last 18 years. I thought of the career I had sidelined, the consulting business I had imagined and then let fade, because his trajectory demanded a supportive partner, a stable home. I thought of the subtle dimming of my own wardrobe, choosing colors that complemented him, styles that spoke of respectable calm rather than the vibrant patterns I once loved. I thought of the network of friends I had maintained, but always from the periphery, always as David Carter's wife first. The tears were for that woman, the one who believed the partnership was equal. The tears stopped as abruptly as they had started. The hollow feeling collapsed in on itself, and from that collapse rose a different substance. It was solid, cold, and very clear. It was anger, but not a frantic, screaming anger. It was a surgical anger. It focused my vision. The tickets on the counter were no longer just a betrayal. They were evidence. They were also an opportunity. I picked them up again. I examined every detail. The flight time, the confirmation number, the seat assignments, 2A and 2B. I committed them to memory. Then I took out my phone. I opened the camera and took several photographs, the tickets, the itinerary, the envelope. I made sure the dates and names were legible. I saved them to a private folder I labeled Household Documents. I returned the tickets to the envelope and placed them back in the exact inner pocket of the briefcase. I zipped it shut, working the zipper past the catch with careful patience. I set the briefcase by the front door where he would expect to find it. Then I walked to the living room and sat in my usual chair. I looked at the space we had built together. The tasteful furniture, the curated art, the perfect silence. It felt like a museum. A museum dedicated to a life that was, in part, a fiction. I was the curator, and I had just discovered a forgery at the heart of the collection. My mind began to work. It did not race, it methodically sorted through options. I could confront him tonight, throw the tickets on the dinner table. Scream, cry, demand answers. I pictured his face, the initial shock, then the swift reconstruction of lies. The gaslighting, it's a surprise for you, Valerie. I was going to tell you at the airport. Or the deflection, it's not what it looks like. It's a client reward trip. I'm taking a junior associate for networking. He would have a story. He was always prepared. A direct confrontation now would give him the advantage of time and privacy. He could spin it. He could mollify. He could make me feel foolish for doubting him. No, that was the old Valerie, the one who accepted explanations at face value, the one who prioritized peace. The new Valerie, the one sitting very still in the quiet museum of a living room, considered a different path. He had said he was going on a business trip. He had lied. The ticket said Hawaii with a guest. The guest was not me. He intended to walk out that door tomorrow and board that plane. He believed I would remain here in this house, waiting for him, oblivious. What if I did not remain here? The question was not impulsive. It was logistical. I had my own money, a modest inheritance from my aunt, kept in a separate account he rarely thought about. I had a passport. I had time. Most importantly, I had the element of surprise. He thought I was in the dark. That was his critical weakness. I stood up. The decision was made. I would not confront him tonight. I would not give him the chance to explain away the unexplainable. I would let him believe his lie was secure. I would let him pack his bags with a clear conscience. I would let him meet his guest at the airport. And I would be there. The goal was not to prevent the trip. The goal was to reshape its outcome entirely. The anger inside me was a blueprint. It dictated calm. It demanded precision. This would not be an emotional reaction. It would be a strategic response. I heard the garage door open, his key in the lock. I stood up, smoothed my shirt, and walked toward the kitchen. By the time he entered, calling, "Honey, I'm home," I was at the sink, filling a pot with water for pasta. My face was calm. My eyes were dry. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice even, pleasant. The same question I asked every day. "Long," he sighed, dropping his keys on the counter. He came over and kissed the top of my head. His briefcase was by the door, untouched. "Just grinding through. Gotta finish packing for Chicago tonight. Early flight tomorrow." "I'll make sure you're up," I said, turning to give him a small smile. It felt strange on my face, like wearing a glove that almost fit. "I put your briefcase by the door so you don't forget it." "Thanks, Val. You're the best." He poured himself a drink and headed for the study. I turned back to the sink, watching the water swirl in the pot. The lie hung in the air between us, tangible to me, invisible to him. I had never thought of myself as a vengeful person. But standing there, listening to the ordinary sounds of our evening beginning, I understood that some actions create their own justice. He had set the plan in motion. All I had to do was change the destination. The water boiled for the pasta. I made a marinara sauce from a jar, adding basil from the windowsill. We ate at the kitchen island, as we often did on weeknights. David talked about a merger at his firm, the potential for a promotion if it went well. I nodded at the appropriate moments, asked the expected questions. My mind was elsewhere, examining the architecture of my new plan, testing its load-bearing walls. Every laugh of his, every casual gesture, felt like a performance I was now critically reviewing. I noticed the way he avoided direct eye contact when speaking about his trip, his focus on his plate just a moment too long. I had seen these signs before and dismissed them as stress. Now, they were confirmations. He packed after dinner. I heard the roll of his suitcase down the hallway, the click of the latches. He packed for Chicago, conservative suits, a trench coat. I thought of the Hawaiian itinerary, the resort casual it implied. The disconnect was almost humorous. He came to bed late, smelling of toothpaste and the scotch he'd finished in his study. He fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and untroubled. I lay awake, watching the digital clock on his bedside table mark the passing hours. My anger was a cold, still mass in my stomach, a solid foundation. Morning came. I got up first, made coffee, toasted bagels. I dressed in my standard at-home clothes, jeans, and a simple sweater. Normalcy was the costume. He appeared already in his travel suit, checking his watch. "All set," he said, giving me that practiced, distracted smile. "Do you have everything? Your briefcase?" I asked, handing him a travel mug. "Right by the door, you're an angel." He kissed me, the same dry peck. "I'll call when I land." "Have a good trip," I said. My voice did not waver. I watched from the front window as his car backed out of the driveway. He gave a short wave without looking back. I did not wave. I stood there until the car turned the corner and disappeared. The house was silent. The performance was over. Now the work began. My first move was verification. Assumption was a liability. I needed facts. I went to my home office, a small, orderly room David rarely entered. I sat at the desk, my computer booting up. I had the firm's main number memorized. I took a steadying breath, not from nervousness, but to center my focus. I dialed. "Carson and Pierce, how may I direct your call?" The receptionist's voice was polished and neutral. "Hi, could you please connect me to David Carter's office? It's Valerie Carter calling." I used my married name deliberately. It was a key that opened doors. One transfer, then a ring. "David Carter's office, this is Michelle," his executive assistant. She was young, efficient, and slightly intimidated by David. I had met her at the last holiday party. "Michelle, hi, it's Valerie Carter. How are you?" I kept my tone light, friendly. "Mrs. Carter, I'm well, thank you. Is everything all right?" A hint of professional concern. "Oh, yes, everything's fine. I'm just doing some tedious household paperwork and David's in such a rush this morning. He forgot to leave me the details for his trip. For the insurance, you know how they are about everything being exact. Could you just confirm his flight number and hotel for Chicago for me? I have his return as Thursday, but I want to be sure." There was a pause. I could hear the faint click of a keyboard. Mrs. Carter, I don't have any travel booked for Mr. Carter to Chicago this week. His calendar is clear except for local meetings." Another pause, longer. I said nothing, letting the silence prompt her. "Are you sure he said Chicago?" she ventured, her voice now cautious. "I don't see any business trips on his itinerary at all for this week or next." The confirmation was a clean, surgical cut. "Oh," I said, injecting just the right amount of confused embarrassment into my voice. "Goodness, I must have misheard him. He's been so busy with the merger talk, my mind is scrambled. Thank you, Michelle. Sorry to bother you." "No bother at all," she said, but her tone had changed. It was softer, edged with a dawning understanding. Assistants know everything. "You're sure everything's okay?" "Perfectly," I said, my voice bright and false. "Thank you again." I hung up before she could say more. I placed the phone on the desk. My hand was clenched, the knuckles white. I made myself release it, flex my fingers. So, no business trip. A clean calendar. He had cleared his schedule for his vacation with guest. The lie was absolute. The next call required more nuance. I scrolled through my contacts. Richard Henderson, David's boss, and more importantly, a man I had known for 15 years. I had worked part-time at the firm early in our marriage before David's ascent made it awkward. Richard had valued my insights, had once offered me a full-time position I declined for David's sake. He was old school, believed in loyalty and decorum. He also had a low tolerance for what he called personal drama, infringing on professional life. I dialed his direct line. It rang 3 times. "Richard Henderson." His voice was a familiar rumble. "Richard, it's Valerie Carter. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Valerie." His tone warmed by a few degrees. "It's been too long. No bad time. What can I do for you?" This required care. I could not accuse. I could only express concern. "I'm actually calling because I'm a little worried about David," I said, allowing a thread of genuine unease to enter my voice. It wasn't hard to summon. "He left this morning for what he told me was a business trip to Chicago, but I was finalizing some beneficiary updates on our life insurance. You know how they make you review things annually, and I realized he didn't give me any details." I called his office to check with Michelle, and she said he doesn't have any business travel booked. I let that hang. I could almost hear him processing on the other end of the line. The silence was heavy. "I see," he said finally, his voice now guarded, neutral. "That is unusual." "I thought so too," I continued gently. "I didn't want to bother him if he's in meetings, and I certainly don't want to make a fuss at the firm. It's probably just a simple misunderstanding. But given the pressure he's been under with the merger, I suppose I just wanted to touch base with someone there. To make sure everything is all right on your end, that there hasn't been any issue I'm unaware of." I framed it as wifely concern, but the subtext was clear. Is my husband lying to his job, too? Richard Henderson was a smart man. He understood subtext. "There is no issue with his work that I am aware of," he said, each word measured. "His performance reviews are solid. The merger is progressing. As for his calendar," he paused. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention discreetly, Valerie. It shows your character. The firm values stability in its leadership. Personal integrity is not separate from professional integrity." That was all I needed. He had heard me. He understood the implication. I had not asked him to do anything, but I had planted a seed. I had also established a line of communication, positioning myself not as a hysterical wife, but as a concerned, rational partner who was now aware of a discrepancy. "Thank you, Richard. That's a relief to hear about his work. I'm sure it's nothing. I probably just got the dates mixed up. I apologize for taking your time." "Not at all," he said. His voice was kind, but there was a new gravity in it. "You take care, Valerie, and don't hesitate to call if you need anything else." The call ended. I sat back in my chair. The verification was complete. The betrayal was confirmed both personally and now, subtly, professionally. I had also secured a potential ally, or at least a neutral party who would not be blindsided by future events. My hand was no longer clenched. It rested flat on the desk, steady. The cold anger had crystallized into a plan. The next steps were logistical. I opened my laptop and navigated to the airline's website. I entered the confirmation number from the tickets I had photographed. The itinerary for David Carter and guest appeared on my screen. I looked at the seat map for the flight to Honolulu. Seat 2C, across the aisle and one row back from 2A and 2B, was available. I logged into David's frequent flyer account. The password was our dog's name and his birth year, unchanged for a decade. I used his miles to book the seat. It was done. I was now a confirmed passenger on my husband's romantic getaway. The confirmation email arrived in my inbox. I did not print it. I simply looked at it, a small, satisfying piece of digital evidence. The timeline was set. The stage was being prepared. All that remained was for me to pack, but not for Chicago, and not as the woman I had been last night. The confirmation email glowed on my screen. Seat 2C, I logged out of David's account and closed the laptop. The digital part was complete. Now came the physical preparation. I went to our bedroom, to the large walk-in closet we shared. His side was neatly ordered, suits and shirts in a somber palette of navy, charcoal, and white. My side was quieter. For years, my choices had trended toward practical separates, soft knits, colors that were inoffensive and easy. Mauve, taupe, slate blue. The wardrobe of a supportive background character. I walked past the recent acquisitions and went to the back. Here, hanging in garment bags and on higher shelves, was the archive of a different woman. I reached for a bag, unzipped it. Inside was a dress. It was a wrap dress in a bold, geometric print of emerald green and cobalt blue. Silk. I had bought it for a charity gala nearly a decade ago, when David was still trying to make partner and we attended every event. I remembered wearing it, feeling the silk whisper against my skin, enjoying the way the colors made my skin look luminous. David had said, "You look beautiful," but his tone had been distracted, his eyes already scanning the room for more important contacts. I had worn it once. I took it out and laid it on the bed. The colors were a shock against our neutral bedding. I went back to the closet. I found a pair of tailored linen trousers the color of cream, and a sleeveless top in a vibrant coral I'd bought on a trip to Miami and never worn. A flowing maxi dress with a subtle gold thread running through it. A jumpsuit in navy that made me feel powerful. These were not clothes for hiding. They were clothes for occupying space. I pulled my suitcase from the top shelf, a carry-on roller bag I hadn't used in years. I opened it on the luggage stand next to David's empty one. His was still there from his mock packing for Chicago, a mute testament to his lie. I began to fold and place my selections inside. Each piece was a deliberate choice. I packed heels, not sensible flats, statement earrings, a clutch that sparkled. I was not packing for a trip of mourning. I was packing for a performance and for the aftermath. I would need to look like I belonged in first class, in a Waikiki resort, in my own new story. As I packed, I considered logistics. I would not stay at their resort. That would grant them too much proximity, too much opportunity for messy private confrontation. I opened my laptop again and booked a room at a different, more exclusive hotel further down the beach. I used my own card. I reserved a car service to pick me up at the airport. I wrote down the confirmation numbers in a small notebook I kept in my purse. Then I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman who stared back had shoulder-length hair with subtle caramel highlights, grown out a little too much. Her makeup was minimal, almost an afterthought. Her expression was pleasant, placid. It was the face I presented to David, to the world. I opened the cabinet and took out my shears, the sharp ones I used for trimming my own bangs. I sectioned a piece of hair at the front and cut, clean and straight. A few inches fell into the sink. I repeated it on the other side. It wasn't a professional cut, but it was sharper, more defined. I dug deeper in the drawer for the curling iron I seldom used and carefully styled the ends under. I applied more makeup than usual, a foundation that evened my skin tone, a touch of contour, eyeliner, a lipstick that was not a nude gloss but a true rose. The change was not dramatic to an outsider, perhaps, but to me it was significant. The face in the mirror looked more awake, more present. The eyes held a directness that had been softened by habit. This was the face of the woman who had worn the emerald and blue dress. She had been buried, but she was not gone. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from David. Landed in Chicago. Crazy delays. Meetings back-to-back. Talk tonight. I looked at the message. The lie was so effortless. I felt the cold anger solidify further, like ice forming layer upon layer. I typed a reply. No problem, don't work too hard. Talk later. I sent it. The banality of it was almost grotesque. I had one more call to make. Not for verification, but for grounding. I scrolled to my friend Lena's number. We had been friends since college. She was a real estate broker, fiercely independent, and had never fully approved of David's traditional expectations. I rarely complained to her about my marriage. It felt like a betrayal of my own choices. But I needed to hear a friendly voice that knew me, the real me. She answered on the second ring. Val, this is a surprise. Everything okay? Hey, Lena, I said, aiming for normal. Everything's fine, just a weird day. David's traveling, and I'm sitting here realizing I haven't done anything just for myself in I don't know how long. There was a slight pause on her end. Okay, what's really going on? Your voice is doing that thing. What thing? That thing where you sound like you're giving a press conference. Calm and collected when you're actually about to flip a table. I almost smiled. Lena knew me too well. I might be taking a little impromptu trip, I said, deciding on a partial truth. A change of scenery. I'll probably be out of touch for a few days. I just wanted to let someone know. A trip by yourself. Her tone was flat, disbelieving. Then it shifted. Valerie Carter, what did he do? I couldn't tell her. Not yet. If I said it out loud, the emotion might crack the cold, controlled shell I needed to maintain. It's complicated. I'll explain when I get back. I just need to do this. Can you just not be surprised if something unusual happens in the next week? She was silent for a long moment. All right, she said finally, her voice firm with understanding. I won't be surprised. And Valerie, whatever it is, you deserve the trip. You deserve a lot more than that. Call me when you can. I will. Thank you, Lena. I ended the call. That was my tether. One person who knew I was stepping off the map. It was enough. I finished packing, zipped the suitcase closed. It stood next to David's, a vibrant stranger beside a familiar ghost. My bag was smaller, but it felt denser, heavier with intent. I wheeled it to the front hallway, then returned to the bedroom. I stripped the bed of the sheets we had shared the night before and put them in the washing machine. I made the bed with fresh linens. It was a symbolic act, a clearing of the space. I did not know if I would sleep in this room again. But if I did, it would not be with the remnants of that last, ignorant night. The afternoon waned. I ate a simple meal. I checked my documents, passport, driver's license, the new credit card I'd activated. I loaded the airline app on my phone and saved my boarding pass to my wallet. My flight was at 1:55 p.m. tomorrow. David was the same. I knew he would arrive at the airport around noon to enjoy the first-class lounge with his guest. I would arrive at 11:30. I needed to see them. I needed the visual confirmation before I stepped onto the plane. As dusk fell, I sat in the living room again. The museum was quiet, but I was no longer its curator. I was an archaeologist who had discovered the truth beneath the exhibits, and I was preparing to present my findings. My suitcase waited by the door, a splash of color in the gray hallway. Inside, it was not just clothing, but a costume for a transformation and the armor for a battle. The woman in the muted sweaters was packed away. The woman in the emerald silk was ready. The car service arrived precisely at 10:30 the next morning. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk myself. The driver, an older man in a cap, nodded and held the door open. I gave him the airport code and settled into the back seat. I wore the cream linen trousers and coral top with flat sandals for now. The emerald dress was carefully folded in my carry-on. My hair was styled as I had practiced, my makeup precise. I looked like a woman going on a trip. There was no outward sign of the seismic shift occurring beneath the surface. The drive was smooth traffic light. I watched the familiar suburbs give way to the highway, then the industrial outskirts near the airport. My phone was silent. David had sent a single text earlier, headed into all-day meetings. Might be hard to connect. Love you. I had not replied. The word love on the screen felt like a physical obscenity. I turned the phone face down on the seat beside me. At the terminal, I paid the driver and wheeled my bag inside. The airport was a study in controlled chaos. The lines for economy check-ins snaked through ropes, families herded bulky luggage, the overhead announcements were a constant drone. I went directly to the first-class counter for the airline. There was no line. A courteous agent checked my passport and printed my bag tag. "Have a pleasant flight to Honolulu, Ms. Carter." The title Ms. struck me. She had used my first name from the passport, not assumed. Mrs., I found I preferred it. With my suitcase gone, carrying only my purse and a small tote, I felt lighter. I passed through security in the priority lane, my movements efficient. On the other side, I entered the vast, sunlit concourse. My flight was departing from gate B12. According to the departures board, it was on time. I had over an hour before boarding. I found a coffee shop with a clear sightline down the corridor leading to B12. I ordered a black coffee and took a seat at a high table near the edge of the seating area. I placed my tote on the chair beside me, a buffer against anyone sitting too close. Then I waited. I sipped the bitter coffee and watched the stream of people. Business travelers with roller bags, tourists in matching t-shirts, couples holding hands. I scanned each face with a detached focus. My heart rate was steady. This was reconnaissance. At 11:52, I saw him. He entered the concourse from the direction of the security checkpoint, pulling his carry-on. He was dressed in khakis and a polo shirt, a casual look he rarely adopted. He looked relaxed, his posture easy, and he was not alone. A young woman walked beside him, her shoulder almost touching his. She was blonde, early 30s, wearing a sundress and sandals. She carried a large designer tote and was smiling up at something David had just said. He laughed in response, a genuine, unguarded laugh I hadn't heard in years. He leaned in slightly as he laughed, his body angling toward her in a clear signal of intimacy. Chloe, this was the guest. I observed them as they walked closer. She was pretty in a conventional way. Her gestures were animated. She reached out and touched his arm briefly to emphasize a point. He did not pull away. He nodded, his attention fully on her. They looked like any other couple heading to a tropical vacation. There was an ease between them, a comfort that spoke of time spent together, of secrets shared. I noted the way he steered her gently with a hand on the small of her back as they navigated around a slower group. The proprietary gesture sent a fresh wave of cold through me. They stopped at a newsstand near my gate. David picked up a magazine, showed it to her. She smiled and selected a paperback novel. He paid. The simple domesticity of the act, him buying her travel entertainment, was more painful than any grandiose gesture could have been. It was a slice of the life he was constructing with her, a life of small, shared moments. They proceeded to the gate area and found seats together near the window. I could see them clearly. She tucked her legs under herself, leaning into him as she spoke. He checked his watch, then his phone, but his focus returned to her quickly. He said something, and she laughed, covering her mouth with her hand in a gesture that seemed both practiced and delighted. I finished my coffee. The cup was empty. I had not tasted it. My observation was clinical. I catalogued their interactions, the number of times he touched her 3, the way he laughed freely, the way she looked at him with open admiration. This was the evidence I had come to collect, not just the fact of her, but the quality of their connection. It was not a sordid, clandestine affair in a cheap hotel. It was a romantic getaway. He was not just cheating. He was building an alternative life where I did not exist. The gate agent announced pre-boarding for first-class passengers and those with elite status. David and Chloe stood up. He gathered their carry-ons, handing her the lighter one. They joined the small line at the desk. I waited until they had scanned their boarding passes and disappeared into the jet bridge. I counted to 60, slowly. Then I stood, collected my things, and walked to the gate. The agent scanned my boarding pass. The soft beep was an affirmation. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Carter." The jet bridge was a long, carpeted tunnel. The sound of the aircraft's engines grew louder. At the door, a flight attendant greeted me with a smile. "Seat 2C is just ahead on the left." I stepped into the cabin. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of cleaning products and coffee. My eyes went immediately to row 2. David was in the aisle seat. 2A, he was leaning across the empty middle seat. 2B, toward the window, speaking to Chloe, who was in 2B. He had his back to the aisle. His head was close to hers. I walked forward. My steps were quiet on the carpet. I passed row 1. I reached row 2. I did not pause. I did not look at him. I placed my tote in the overhead bin above my seat, 2C, directly across the aisle from him. He was still turned away, engrossed. I sat down, fastened my seatbelt, and accepted a glass of champagne from the attendant. I took a small sip. The bubbles were sharp and clean. I looked out my window at the ground crew working below. In my peripheral vision, I saw David settle back into his aisle seat. He picked up the in-flight magazine from his seatback pocket. He still had not looked across the aisle. He was in his bubble with her, believing himself safely hidden in plain sight. The cabin door closed with a heavy thud. The flight attendant began the safety demonstration. I put my champagne in the holder and fastened my seatbelt a little tighter. The plane began to push back from the gate. The journey was underway. He was unaware, but the axis of his world had just shifted. I was here, and I was watching. The plane climbed, the city shrinking into a grid of dull squares below before disappearing into a blanket of clouds. The cabin lights dimmed. I accepted a second glass of champagne from the attendant and declined the offered headphones. I preferred the quiet hum of the engines and the low murmur of conversation around me. I had a book in my tote, but I did not open it. My attention was fixed, but not obviously so, on the couple across the aisle. David and Chloe were in their own world. A flight attendant brought them glasses of wine. They clinked them together in a silent toast, smiling. He leaned over the empty middle seat to talk to her, his voice a low rumble I couldn't decipher. She listened, her eyes wide, then laughed. They shared a tablet, watching a movie, her head occasionally resting against his shoulder. It was a performance of new relationship intimacy, and they were the only audience members who didn't know I was watching. I calculated the timing. The flight was just over 6 hours. We were perhaps 90 minutes in. I needed to act before the cabin settled into a collective drowsiness, before the opportunity for maximum impact passed. My move required a pretext. The lavatory was at the front of the cabin, past their row. That was my stage. I waited until the meal service was complete. The attendants had cleared the trays. The cabin was in that post-meal lull with most window shades down, creating a perpetual twilight. I unfastened my seatbelt and stood up. I smoothed my trousers and walked forward past the galley to the lavatory. I locked the door and looked at myself in the small mirror. My face was calm. My eyes were clear. I took a deep breath, held it, and released it slowly. This was not about anger anymore. It was about execution. I unlocked the door and stepped back into the short hallway. The flight attendants were in the galley, arranging bottles of water. I walked toward my seat. David was in the aisle seat. 2A, he was looking down at his phone, a slight smile on his face. Chloe was by the window, asleep, a blanket tucked under her chin. This was the moment. I did not slow my walk. As I reached row 2, I simply stopped. I turned my head and looked down at him. He sensed a presence and glanced up, annoyed at the interruption. His eyes met mine. The transformation on his face was instantaneous and profound. It was as if his features had been liquid and suddenly flash-frozen. The casual, relaxed expression shattered. His eyes widened, the pupils dilating in pure shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face, leaving a grayish pallor. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, his own ghost. He was utterly paralyzed. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. He just stared. I leaned in just a little, close enough that only he could hear me over the engine noise. My voice was low, perfectly even, and as cold as the air outside the fuselage. I used his own words, the casual lie that had started this entire journey. Business trip, honey. I let the words hang in the space between us. I watched them land, saw the flinch in his eyes, the minute tremor in his hands where they gripped the armrests. I held his gaze for 1 second longer, allowing him to fully comprehend the reality. I knew. I was here. His carefully constructed deception was over. Then, without another word, I straightened up. I turned and took the single step to my seat. 2C, I sat down smoothly and refastened my seatbelt. I picked up my champagne glass from the holder. It was still half full, the bubbles nearly gone. I took a sip. It tasted like victory, crisp and dry. I did not look at him again. I did not need to. I could feel the panic radiating from him like heat. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him remain rigid, staring straight ahead at the seatback in front of him. He did not turn to look at me. He did not wake Chloe. He was frozen in a state of pure, incapacitating dread. Several minutes passed. The flight attendant came by. "Another drink, ma'am." "No, thank you, I'm fine." She moved to David's row. "Sir, can I get you anything?" He startled violently, as if touched by a live wire. "No," he said, his voice strangled. "Nothing." The attendant moved on. The normalcy of the cabin continued, the soft snores, the click of tablets, the gentle ding of a call button. But in row 2, a silent earthquake had occurred. The tectonic plates of David's life had just collided. I opened my book, but I didn't read a word. I was processing the feeling. The cold, surgical anger had not dissipated, but it was now joined by something else, a profound sense of clarity. The power had shifted. He was no longer the puppeteer pulling strings in the dark. He was the one on the hook, waiting for the next move, and he had no idea what it would be. His ignorance was now his prison. I allowed myself a small, private thought. The hardest part, the initial reveal, was done. He was now living in the nightmare he had created. The rest of the flight was a form of psychological torture for him, and he had to endure it silently, sitting next to the woman he was betraying me with, while his betrayed wife sat 3 feet away. It was a perfect, contained hell. About an hour later, I saw him get up abruptly and head to the lavatory. He was gone for a long time. When he returned, his face was damp, as if he'd splashed it with water. He looked exhausted. He sank into his seat and closed his eyes, but the tense set of his jaw told me he was not sleeping. I, on the other hand, felt remarkably at peace. I adjusted my seat into a more comfortable position, closed my eyes, and actually managed to doze for a while. When I awoke, the captain was announcing our initial descent into Honolulu. The cabin lights brightened. Around me, people began stirring, gathering their belongings. I sat up and looked out the window. The first thing I saw was the vast, deep blue of the Pacific, then the sharp green peaks of the islands emerging from the sea. It was beautiful. It was the landscape of his promised escape, and I had arrived to reclaim it. The wheels touched down with a gentle squeal and a rush of reverse thrust. The island air was visible even through the window, a shimmering heat haze over the tarmac. The plane taxied toward the open-air gates characteristic of the Honolulu airport. Around me, passengers stirred with the anticipatory energy of arrival. I remained seated, calm. My plan for disembarkation was specific. David, in his aisle seat, was a statue of tension. He had not looked at me once since my whisper. He had spent the final hour of the flight staring rigidly ahead, his knuckles white on the armrests. Chloe, now awake and refreshed, was chatting excitedly about seeing the ocean, unaware of the seismic fault line that had opened beside her. The dissonance was almost comical. The moment the seatbelt sign chimed off, I stood. I was in the aisle seat. I had planned that too. I retrieved my tote from the overhead bins swiftly before the aisle clogged. I did not glance at row 2. I moved forward with purpose, blending with the other first-class passengers exiting. I heard Chloe's voice behind me, bright and clear. "David, come on. Our bags will be out soon." I exited the aircraft directly into the warm, fragrant air of Hawaii. It was a physical sensation, moist, floral, thick with the scent of plumeria and salt. The jet bridge was open-sided. Sunlight poured in. I followed the flow of passengers through the gateway and into the arrivals terminal. It was a large, open space with high ceilings, tropical plants, and the distant sound of ukulele music from a nearby gift shop. The mood was universally cheerful. I did not proceed to baggage claim. Instead, I found a strategic position. There was a large pillar near the entrance to the secure area, just before the doors that led out to the ground transportation and greeting area. From behind this pillar, I had a clear view of the corridor where arriving passengers from my flight would emerge. I could also see the sliding glass doors to the outside world, where drivers held signs and families embraced. This was the choke point. They would have to pass through here. I waited. I adjusted the strap of my tote on my shoulder. I watched families reunite, couples hug. The joyful noise was a stark contrast to the silent theater about to unfold. Within minutes, I saw them. David emerged first from the corridor, his carry-on rolling behind him. His head was on a swivel, his eyes scanning the crowd with palpable anxiety. He looked hunted. Chloe followed, clinging to his arm, her face alight with vacation bliss. She was pointing toward the doors, saying something about finding their shuttle. He was nodding mechanically, his attention wholly consumed by searching for me in the throng. They moved toward the baggage carousel designated for our flight. I stayed behind my pillar, observing. They collected their suitcases, his sturdy black one, hers a new-looking pink hardshell. The normalcy of the action, the mundane task of vacation logistics, felt charged with impending drama. With their luggage gathered, they began to make their way toward the exit doors. David was still scanning, his movements stiff. He was shepherding Chloe, but his focus was fractured. This was my moment. The public setting was perfect, crowded enough for an audience, open enough for a clean escape. I stepped out from behind the pillar. I did not walk directly toward them. I calculated a path that would intersect theirs naturally, as if I too were heading for the taxis. I walked at a steady pace, my back straight, my expression composed. The warm air from the open doors washed over me. I could see the palm trees lining the curbside outside. They were about 20 feet from the sliding doors. Chloe was laughing at something, leaning into David. He was forcing a smile, his eyes darting past her shoulder. Then he saw me. His entire body locked. He stopped walking so abruptly that Chloe stumbled against him. All color drained from his face once more, leaving him ashen. His mouth fell open. The suitcase handle slipped from his grip, and his bag tipped over with a thud. He looked like a man who had walked into a glass wall he hadn't seen. Chloe, confused, followed his line of sight. Her smile faltered as she saw me approaching. Her eyes, a clear blue, flicked from my face to David's horrified expression and back again. She didn't recognize me, but she recognized disaster. I continued walking until I was directly in their path, stopping about 5 feet from them. The crowd flowed around us, a river parting around 3 stones. I could feel the curious glances of passers-by beginning to linger. I looked at David first, holding his terrified gaze for a beat. Then I turned my attention to Chloe. I offered her a small, polite smile, the kind you'd give a stranger. She stared back, utterly bewildered. David found his voice, but it was a cracked, desperate whisper. "Valerie, what how?" I ignored him. I kept my eyes on Chloe, my smile not wavering. The scene was set. The players were in position. The air between us was electric with unspoken truth. I had them exactly where I wanted them, exposed, confused, and trapped in the bright, public light of the paradise they thought they'd stolen. I took one small, final step forward, closing the distance. My move was deliberate. I saw David flinch as if expecting a blow. Chloe took an instinctive half-step back, her grip tightening on her suitcase handle. The sounds of the airport, the announcements, the music, the chatter, seemed to fade into a dull roar, a backdrop for the silent confrontation unfolding in this pocket of space. I had their complete, horrified attention. The next words were mine to deliver. He looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. The current was still coursing through him, locking his joints, stopping his breath. Chloe's face was a blank page of confusion, waiting for an explanation he could not provide. I let the silence stretch for a beat, long enough for the discomfort to become noticeable to those walking past. A woman with a stroller glanced our way, her steps slowing. A pair of businessmen paused their conversation to look. Then I spoke. My voice was not loud, but it was clear and carried the precise, polished tone I used to use in client meetings. It cut through the ambient airport noise. "David," I said, his name a simple statement. I turned my full attention to Chloe, offering her the same polite, terrifying smile. "And you must be Chloe." Her eyes widened. She knew my name. The realization of who I was began to dawn, a slow, horrible sunrise. Her grip on her pink suitcase tightened until her knuckles were white. David made a sound, a choked, wordless attempt at speech. "Val, please let me explain." I raised one hand, just slightly, a gesture of silencing that was both elegant and absolute. He stopped as if gagged. "I thought you might need a real wife to show you how to enjoy a real vacation," I said, my gaze swinging back to him. I delivered the line not with sarcasm, but with a chilling matter-of-factness. Then I looked at Chloe again, my smile never wavering. "Aloha, Chloe, I've heard so much about you." The effect was instantaneous and total. Chloe's face crumpled. The vacation glow vanished, replaced by a mask of shock and dawning humiliation. Her eyes flew to David, filled with a betrayal of her own. "You said she wouldn't find out," she whispered, the words barely audible but sharp as glass. Chloe, it's not," David stammered, his head swiveling between us, a trapped animal. He was trying to manage two collapsing fronts at once and failing utterly. The bystanders were fully engaged now. The woman with the stroller had stopped completely. The businessmen were watching openly, their expressions a mix of pity and fascination. A few other passengers from our flight had recognized the scene and were lingering at a discreet distance, pretending to check their phones. "You told me you were separated," Chloe said, her voice rising in pitch, edged with panic. "You said it was just paperwork." David reached for her arm, but she wrenched it away as if burned. "Not here," he hissed, his eyes desperate, flicking toward the growing audience. "Oh, I think here is perfect," I said calmly. I took a small step back, creating a physical space that framed the three of us as a spectacle. Transparency is so important, don't you think? Especially when so many promises are being made. A low murmur rippled through the nearest onlookers. I heard a distinct, "Oh, snap," from a younger man holding a surfboard bag. Someone else whispered, "That's his wife." David's composure shattered. His shoulders hunched, as if trying to make himself smaller. His face was a terrible canvas of shame, fear, and impotent rage. He could not refute anything I said. He could not explain away my presence, my knowledge, or the 2 tickets purchased for him and a guest who was not his wife. Chloe started to cry, silent tears streaking through her makeup. She fumbled for a tissue in her bag, her movements jerky with embarrassment. She would not look at me. She would not look at the crowd. She stared at the floor. A woman who had just realized the paradise she'd been sold was built on a landfill of lies. I had said what I came to say. The truth was now a living entity in the space between us, witnessed by 24 strangers. David's secret was not just out, it was public property. His professional persona, the careful image he cultivated, was irreparably cracked. Anyone here could be a client, a colleague, a connection. In the age of smartphones, this moment was likely already being preserved digitally. I looked at my husband one last time. The man I had built a life with was gone, replaced by this pale, sweating stranger drowning in the consequences of his own choices. I felt nothing for him. No pity, no lingering love, not even burning hatred. There was only a vast, clean emptiness. I adjusted the strap of my tote on my shoulder, a simple, practical movement that underscored the normality I was about to reclaim. "Enjoy your trip," I said, my voice neutral, as if wishing well to casual acquaintances. The final twist of the knife was its blandness. Then I turned. I did not look back. I walked directly toward the sliding glass doors, which parted with a soft hiss. The warm, floral air enveloped me. I saw my driver immediately, a man in a white shirt holding a sign that read MS Carter. He nodded as I approached and took my tote. "Welcome to Hawaii, Ms. Carter. Your car is right this way." I followed him to a sleek black sedan. He opened the rear door for me. I slid inside, the cool leather a relief against my skin. As the car pulled away from the curb, I allowed myself one glance back through the tinted window. Through the glass doors, I could still see them. Two diminished figures standing amid the stream of happy arrivals, their luggage at their feet, surrounded by a bubble of palpable disgrace. They were not moving. They were trapped in the aftermath, a frozen portrait of a lie exposed. I turned away and faced forward. The car merged into the flow of traffic, taking me toward my hotel, my solitude, and the first night of the rest of my life. The confrontation was over. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of my own freedom. The car moved smoothly away from the airport, merging into traffic along a highway lined with palm trees. The driver was silent, professional. I watched the scenery pass. Low buildings, colorful signs, glimpses of distant green mountains. The air conditioning was a steady hum. My heart rate was normal. My hands rested loosely in my lap. The confrontation was a closed event, already being filed away in my mind under completed actions. The hotel I had chosen was not the one on David's itinerary. It was smaller, more exclusive, set at the quieter end of Waikiki. The car turned into a driveway lined with tropical flowers and stopped under a portcotcher. A doorman in a white uniform opened my door. "Welcome, ma'am." I stepped out. The air here was still warm and floral, but the sound of the airport was gone, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant, rhythmic sigh of the ocean. I walked into the open-air lobby. It was all dark wood, sleek stone, and enormous arrangements of orchids. The check-in process was swift and discreet. The clerk handed me a key card. "Your Ocean View suite is ready, Ms. Carter. We hope you enjoy your stay." A bellhop took my suitcase and led me to the elevator, then to a door at the end of a hushed corridor. The suite was spacious, decorated in neutral tones with accents of bamboo and sea glass. The wall of windows faced a lanai, and beyond that, the endless blue of the Pacific. The bellhop placed my bag on the stand, accepted his tip with a nod, and left. I was alone. I stood in the center of the room for a moment, absorbing the quiet. There was no tension here, no performance required. This space was mine, uncontested. I walked to the windows and slid open the glass door. The sound of the waves grew louder, a constant, calming roar. A warm, salt-tinged breeze moved through the room. I unpacked my suitcase, hanging the emerald dress in the closet, placing my toiletries in the bathroom. The routine was familiar, but the context was utterly new. I was not unpacking for a couple's retreat. I was settling into a command post of my own making. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in bands of orange and purple, I showered and changed. I put on the emerald and cobalt blue dress. The silk felt cool and luxurious against my skin. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The woman who looked back was not a wife, not a victim, not an avenger. She was simply a woman in a beautiful dress, about to have dinner on her own terms. I did not call for room service. I went downstairs to the hotel's signature restaurant, an open-air terrace that cantilevered over the beach. The hostess showed me to a table for two by the railing. "Will someone be joining you?" "No," I said, "just me." She nodded without pity or curiosity and placed a single menu before me. I ordered a glass of champagne and studied the menu. I chose dishes I liked, not considering anyone else's preferences. a seared tuna appetizer, a lobster tail with truffled potatoes. I ordered a second glass of champagne. Around me, the restaurant filled with couples and groups. Their conversations created a low, pleasant hum. I did not feel conspicuous. I felt invisible in the best way, free from observation or expectation. I watched the ocean, the last light catching the crests of the waves. I tasted my food, each bite deliberate and appreciated. The lobster was perfectly cooked. The champagne was dry and crisp. My phone, which I had placed on the table beside my water glass, began to vibrate. The screen lit up with David's name and a photo of him smiling, a photo I had taken years ago. I watched it buzz, a frantic insect against the white tablecloth. I did not touch it. After several cycles, it stopped. A notification appeared for a voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again, and again. Each time, I simply looked at the screen, watched the name flash, and let it go to voicemail. There was no anger in me as I did this. There was only a profound disconnection. That name on the screen was associated with a person who no longer had any claim on my attention, my time, or my emotional energy. After the sixth call, the buzzing stopped for a while. I finished my meal and declined dessert. I asked for the check and paid with my own card. As I was signing the receipt, my phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a text message. I picked up the phone and read it. "Valerie, we need to talk. This is insane. Where are you, please?" I deleted the text without replying. Then I opened my settings, navigated to his contact, and selected block this caller. A prompt asked if I was sure. I tapped yes. It was a simple, technical action, the final severing of a digital tether. I placed the phone back in my purse. I took one last look at the ocean, now a vast expanse of dark blue under a starry sky. The sound of the waves was a constant, reassuring presence. I stood, left the terrace, and walked back through the lobby to the elevator. In my suite, I changed into a comfortable sleep shirt, brushed my teeth, and got into the enormous bed. The sheets were cool and smooth. I lay there in the dark, listening to the distant ocean. My mind was quiet. There was no racing replay of the day's events, no rehearsing of future conversations, no ache of betrayal. There was only a deep, cellular sense of peace. I had done what I set out to do. I had exposed the truth. I had reclaimed my dignity. And now I was in a beautiful place, alone, by my own choice. Sleep came easily, and it was dreamless and deep. I woke to the gentle light of dawn seeping around the edges of the blackout curtains. The air in the room was cool and still. For a moment, I simply lay there, listening to the rhythmic pulse of the ocean. There was no immediate need to move, no schedule to follow. The peace was a tangible presence. I rose and pulled open the curtains. The sky was a soft watercolor of pink and gold over the dark blue sea. I made coffee using the machine in the room and carried the cup out to the lanai. The morning air was fresh, carrying the scent of salt and blooming flowers. I sat in a comfortable chair and watched the light change. My phone was on the bedside table. I had left it there all night, undisturbed. After finishing my coffee, I went inside and picked it up. The screen showed multiple notifications. I had blocked David's number, but his attempts had left traces. Several missed calls from unknown caller last night now ceased. There were also 3 new voicemails. I did not listen to them. The other notifications were texts and emails. I scrolled through. Several were from Lena. The first, sent last night, heard a rumor, "You are a legend. Call me when you're ready." The second, sent an hour ago, seriously. "Legend. I have wine and listening ears whenever you land." Another text was from Anya, a friend from my old part-time days at the firm. "Val, Richard H. just called me for your number. He said he had it but wanted to be sure. He sounded serious. Everything okay? That was interesting." Richard was checking his network. Then there was an email from my cousin Maya, subject line, "Is this true?" The preview showed a forwarded message, but I didn't open it. The news was traveling, as I knew it would. The airport confrontation was not a private event. As I was reading, the phone vibrated in my hand with an incoming call. The screen displayed, "Richard Henderson." I watched it ring twice, then answered. "Valerie, it's Richard Henderson. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, Richard. I'm awake." My voice was calm. I walked back to the lanai. "I'll get straight to the point," he said. His tone was grave, but not unkind. "I received a rather disturbing call from David late last night. He was agitated. He said there had been an incident at the Honolulu airport." I said nothing, allowing him to continue. He gave me a fragmented version of events. It was not coherent. He mentioned you being there, which contradicted his earlier statement to his assistant about a business trip to Chicago. Richard paused. I could hear him choosing his words with care. "This morning, I received 2 other calls, one from a junior partner who was on the same flight. He recognized David. The other was from the wife of a client who was in the arrivals area. She described a public altercation." "I see," I said. "Valerie, I called you because David's account lacks credibility. The firm's reputation, while secondary to the personal pain here, is something I must consider. We hold our senior staff to a standard of personal integrity. This situation suggests a profound lack of judgment and honesty." "I understand," I replied. "For clarity, Richard, he told me he was going to Chicago on business. I discovered 2 first-class tickets to Hawaii in his briefcase, for himself and a guest. The guest was a woman from his office. I verified with Michelle that no business trip was scheduled. I then decided to use his frequent flyer miles to book a seat on their flight. The incident at the airport was me informing his companion of my identity." The line was silent for a long moment. I heard a slow exhale. "Thank you for the factual summary," he said, his voice even more solemn. "That aligns with the other accounts. This is a breach of trust on multiple levels. I have informed David that he is on immediate administrative leave. The merger discussions are too sensitive to have a key person embroiled in a scandal of their own making. His position is now under review by the executive board." This was the professional consequence. It had landed swiftly and with finality. "I appreciate you letting me know," I said. "This is not a favor, Valerie. It is a consequence. I also want you to know that if you require any documentation from the firm regarding his employment or travel claims for your own personal proceedings, my office will provide it. Discreetly." "That may be necessary. Thank you." "Take care of yourself," he said, and ended the call. I placed the phone on the small table. The sun was fully above the horizon now, casting a bright, clear light. The professional fallout was in motion. David's career, the thing he had often prioritized above all else, was now in jeopardy because of his personal choices. The symmetry was satisfying. I spent the next hour responding to messages. I texted Lena, "I'm okay. Truly, we'll call soon. Thank you for being my legend confirmer." I texted Anya, "All is managed. Thanks for the heads up about Richard." I emailed my cousin, "It's true. I'm fine. More details later." With each response, I felt my network solidify around me. These were not just friends offering sympathy. They were allies acknowledging a strategic victory. Their support was not pity, but solidarity. My phone buzzed once more. A new text from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Carter, this is Chloe. I am so sorry. I didn't know. He told me you were basically separated. I feel sick. I'm flying home today. I won't be seeing him again. I'm sorry for my part in this." I read the message twice. Her humiliation was complete. She was a casualty, but one of her own making. I felt no urge to absolve her. I simply deleted the text and blocked the number as well. Her remorse was her burden to carry. It was not my job to ease it. I stood and stretched in the warm sun. The fallout was being contained. David was facing professional and personal ruin. Chloe was retreating in disgrace. My friends were encircling me. The truth was out, and it had done its work. I had the entire day ahead of me in paradise, and no one to answer to. The revenge was no longer an active pursuit. It was a completed fact. Now it was time to live in the space that fact had cleared. The final day in Hawaii dawned clear and bright. I had booked a small group snorkeling tour to a reef preserve on the North Shore. When the van picked me up, I was the only solo traveler among 3 couples. The guide, a sun-weathered local named Kanoa, handed me a mask and fins without comment. The couples chattered excitedly among themselves, and I was grateful for their self-contained energy. I sat by the window. watching the landscape change from dense hotel zones to sprawling green valleys and finally to rugged coastline. The boat was a sturdy catamaran. We motored out to a sheltered cove where the water was a flat, brilliant turquoise. Kanoa gave brief, clear instructions. I adjusted my mask, bit down on the snorkel mouthpiece, and slipped into the water. The world below the surface was a silent, vibrant revelation. Schools of yellow and blue fish moved as a single, shimmering entity. A sea turtle, ancient and serene, glided past, completely indifferent to my presence. Corals in shapes of brains and fans and delicate lace provided a complex architecture for this entire hidden society. The sunlight filtered down in shifting rays, illuminating flashes of color. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was a live asterisk. It existed wholly independently of my pain, my plans, my revenge. It was a system of immense complexity and resilience, carrying on. I floated there for a long time, my breathing a rhythmic Darth Vader rasp through the snorkel tube. The cold, surgical anger that had sustained me for the past week seemed to dissolve into the salt water. It was washed away, replaced by a sense of scale. My life, David's betrayal, the airport scene, they were significant to me, but they were also small. The ocean held no opinion on them. This perspective was not diminishing, it was freeing. I was a part of something much larger, and I had the capacity to navigate my own current. Back on the boat, wrapped in a towel, I accepted a slice of fresh pineapple. The sweetness was intense. One of the women from a couple smiled at me. "It's amazing down there, isn't it?" "It is," I agreed. "It really is." The return flight to the mainland was a red-eye. Leaving at 10 p.m., I spent the afternoon packing slowly, then had a late lunch by the pool. I wore the cream linen trousers and coral top again. I felt comfortable in my own skin. At the airport, I checked my bag and passed through security without incident. The gate area was quiet. I bought a notebook and a pen from a newsstand. When boarding was called, I took my seat in first class. This time, a window seat I had selected for myself. The cabin was dark once we were airborne, most passengers quickly settling in with blankets and eye masks. I opened the notebook. On the first page, I wrote a single word, consultancy asterisk. Beneath it, I began to sketch an outline. Not vague dreams, but a concrete plan. My area of expertise was organizational efficiency and client relations, honed over years of unofficial work supporting David and my formal part-time role at the firm. I had a network, now proven and strengthened. I had capital from my separate account. I had a story of resilience that, while I would never market it, gave me a core of unshakable confidence. I listed potential first clients: Lena's real estate firm, which had grown disorganized with success; Anya's nonprofit. Richard Henderson had implied a professional reference if discreetly needed. I mapped out a basic website structure, services offered, fee scales. The pen moved steadily across the page, the ideas flowing with a clarity they'd never had before. When I had set these dreams aside years ago, it was with a vague sense of someday. Now, someday was Monday. The plan was not a rebellion against David. It was a reaffirmation of Valerie. I must have dozed, the notebook open on my lap, because I was awakened by the captain announcing our initial descent. I looked out the window. Below, the familiar sprawl of my home city was laid out like a circuit board glittering in the pre-dawn darkness. It looked different. It was no longer just the place where my old life had happened. It was the location of my next one. I deplaned with my carry-on, collected my suitcase from baggage claim, and walked out to the arrival's curb. The air here was cool and dry, smelling of concrete and exhaust. A familiar car was idling in the pickup lane. Lena leaned against the hood. She saw me, pushed off, and walked over. She didn't say anything. She just opened her arms. I hugged her, feeling the solid, reliable strength of her. "Welcome home, you glorious shark," she murmured into my shoulder. "Thanks for the ride," I said. She popped the trunk and I loaded my bag. We got into her car. She pulled into traffic, heading not toward my old neighborhood, but toward her place in a different suburb. "Guest house is all ready," she said. "Key on the counter. Fridge is stocked. Wi-Fi password is on the router. Stay as long as you need. Forever, preferably. My kids want to know if you'll teach them how to destroy men with words, but I told them that's an advanced course." I smiled, a real easy smile. Beginner class first, basic self-worth and boundary setting. I'll sign them up. We drove in comfortable silence for a while. The first hints of sunrise were lightening the sky ahead of us, a soft gray glow. So what's the first order of business? Lena asked, glancing over. Meeting with a lawyer, I said, my voice even. Then setting up an LLC, I have a plan. Lena nodded, a slow, satisfied smile on her face. Of course you do. She turned into her driveway. The guest house was a small, detached cottage behind her main home, lit by a soft porch light. It looked cozy, private, and completely mine for now. I took my suitcase from the trunk. Lena handed me the key. I'm right inside if you need anything, but you won't. I know, I said. Thank you, Lena, for everything. Anytime. I wheeled my suitcase up the path to the cottage door. I unlocked it and stepped inside. It was simply furnished, clean, and quiet. I left my suitcase by the door and walked to the small kitchen window. The sunrise was proper now, painting streaks of gold and rose across the sky. It wasn't an ending, bleeding into darkness. It was a beginning, flooding the world with light. I had left for Hawaii with a mission of vengeance. I had returned with something more valuable, a clear-eyed view of the past and a detailed map for the future. The revenge was complete. It had been precise, public, and perfectly executed. But its true success was not in his humiliation. It was in my liberation. The woman who had zipped up that briefcase was gone. The woman standing in this quiet room, watching the sunrise, was someone new. She was someone who had looked beneath the surface and found not just coral and fish, but her own strength. She was someone with a plan. She was someone who was just getting started.